Yamu was wrapping up victory in yesterday's governorship primaries in Edo State. President Muhammadu Buhari was holding a closed-door meeting with governors of the All Progressive Congress at the presidential villa in the latest move to find a lasting solution to the crisis rocking the party as it prepares for two staggered governorship elections in Edo and Ondo State. President Buhari assured the governors that a resolution will be reached in a few days, even as they want him to urgently find a way to reconcile aggrieved members in order not to further jeopardize the party's chances. A chairman of the All Progressive Congress Governor Forum and Governor of KB State, Atiku Bagudu, says it's likely that the president will call for a meeting that the party's National Executive Council to trash out all the contentious issues. He also shared his opinion on the removal of the Deputy National Secretary of the party, as well as the protest at the party headquarters.
Young people expressing their view by demonstrating, members of the party challenging in court processes show that people are free to express their view, and dissent is not suppressed. What is important is that all will be taken on board in arriving at a conclusion that will be to the satisfaction of most party members and indeed Nigerians. Mr. President have shown that he's a Democrat. He's not running the party. Yes, he's the party leader. He allows party organs to do and decide what should be done. He's very, very hesitant to use his standing, even as party leader, talk less of his authority as Mr. President and of the country to direct things. But at all times, he has been alive to the issues, and like I said earlier, I believe with the encouragement he gave us this morning, with the level of detail he have about all what is happening and the number of people he has listened to and heard, I believe whatever needs to be done, including the possibility of calling any organ of the party that is necessary to the resolution of lingering issues, will be done immediately. And let me again warn that in a party is never a perfect assembly. There will always be issues, and that is why we talk. But yes, certainly organs of the party needs to meet, and Mr. President, without directing, is always supportive of the necessity of party organs meeting at the right appropriately.
You guys, but it reminds me pretty much of an American band called One Republic that sang a song, Too Late to Apologize. Is this the case? What is happening now? Because this is medicine after death. Obaseki is gone. All right, that's a big dent on the APC. There are court cases everywhere. It's not any better in Ondo states. Agbo, as is fondly called, has left the fold of the APC, has joined the PDP. So a lot of people are saying it's too late.
As far as I'm concerned, I disagree with Governor Bagudu saying the president has been reluctant to use his standing. What is the point of standing if you don't use it? And it's not about dictating to people and laying down the law, of course not. But it's about using your influence, and he has a considerable amount of influence to settle disputes before they get to the point that you have just described, which is what we're seeing now. It's a crisis at the moment. It did not need to escalate to this position that we're in. And it must be recalled that APC, life goes on post-2023, post the Buhari presidency. APC really needs to get its house in order to be a viable political force come 2023. And the president would have done well to sort of ensure that, not that this party came together, this coalition came together, got him into power, and promptly disintegrated.
Well, when you place the buck at the desk of the president as the leader of the All Progressives Congress, you must also ask yourselves the question, what is the president's interest? The president ran for the position about 4 times, record 4 times, and then eventually he got the ticket. So what is his ambition? What is his interest as a person? What kind of legacy does President Buhari want to leave behind? What is more important to him? Is it the survival of the APC or his own personal ambition? And I raise these questions together because people have raised the point that President Buhari will seem to have been aloof in addressing the crisis that befell the APC and that is still in place, because perhaps he doesn't need that platform again. In 2023, he's not going to run for the position of president. And sometimes, as we have seen within the political terrain, political leaders are driven by their own personal interests. If they do not have a dog in the fight, they probably will not bother. The second point is that the APC itself, as it is a party of strange bedfellows. The APC came together as a special purpose vehicle to get President Jonathan out of power. And there were elements that came from different constituencies. The CPC, was it the AC, as it became, and then what was called the new PDP at the time. It was not as if there was a basic ideological, thread tying all of these groups together. So the expectation, of course, is that it's either they came together to form a family, or sooner or later, Kama will catch up with them, there will be an implosion. So these are some of the questions that we can raise. But it's good to see the president now taking an interest in what is happening within the party. But as both of you have pointed out, I said, well, it may well be too little, too late, because the horse has already bolted, as they say. In Edo State, for example, the primaries took place yesterday, but you still have Giadom, who has been restrained perpetually by a court from parading himself as the chairman of the party, still saying that what happened in Edo State yesterday was illegal. And then you still have in Ondo State the crisis that you pointed out. Now, can the APC be rescued? I don't know. A lot happens in politics, but the bottom line is that we should say that either in Edo State or in Ondo State, the political leaders should keep Nigeria first. They should also place the interests of the people of Edo State, the people of Ondo State first. That is not what we have seen. And if all that the president does is to refocus, to redirect energies, that probably will be useful.
We need to go to a break. When we come back, we'll take Rotus, Odiri, and the team. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotus Odiri now joins us to give us Africa Business Update. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Tundun. Good morning, Rufai. Look, this first bit of news, I could spend the entire segment. I mean, I hope I don't. But the very fascinating outcome from a Bloomberg virtual conference that was held just yesterday, a Bloomberg Invest Global Virtual Conference. There were two that came from two African banking executives that, it's got a number of people talking in relation to bank debts. The first comment, this is now, of course, the G20, just a little background, as we know, the G20 in April agreed to give some debt relief to a number of poor countries. China also has now verbally committed to sign up for that. We've talked about it here, about what it would mean to, give a bit of debt relief to some African nations and other, struggling nations who are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. But these two banking executives came out and said it's not a good idea. We've got their quotes here. We'll start with Mr. Adeyemi, the group CEO of EcoBank. He says debt forgiveness is not helpful because your debt is somebody else's savings. When you go to the market to borrow money, the market is looking at your current and past behavior. Let's look at the other executive, Mr. James Mwangi. He is the group managing director and CEO of Equity Group Holdings. He's based in Kenya. He said, to a great extent, forgiveness is a form of default. And essentially then what it does is that it distorts markets. So it is one area that we should all be conscious of the unintended consequences. So these are incredibly fascinating comments because they are not only coming from executives, they're coming from two Africans, right? And we all know the debt story. Mr. Ayemi is a Nigerian. Mr. Nwange is a Kenyan. Mr. Ayemi is familiar, of course, with Nigeria's own history with debt, how President Obasanjo got the Paris Club to give us a 60% haircut on a $30 billion debt that he ended up paying off at $12 billion. Both of them are very familiar with this. And it brings up a fascinating conversation because when you think about it, these countries need help. They need to be able to use Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, said that, look, these countries that need this debt relief, they should be prudent in how they spend the money and keep receipts. But here, you've got two executives saying, well, this is perhaps not a good idea. You're going to possibly affect your credit rating when you go to the markets because this is a form of default. You're also going to be, I found the first statement from Mr. Ayemi fascinating in that your debt is somebody else's savings. You're paying interest on that debt, which is going towards someone else. Now, we should not lose sight of the fact that these are both bankers. And if you look at the financial statements of any financial institution, one of the most crucial line items on the income statement is interest income. Banks depend on interest income because they feed off debt. But, the conversations that these two quotes have spurred I found incredibly fascinating because now it calls into question as to whether or not these debts should be forgiven. And also, Africa and other poor nations, why do you keep, of course, allowing your debt to pile up? We know why. They are commodity-dependent economies, resource-dependent economies. When prices crash, there's issues with currencies. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime, well, not really once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, but there are unique circumstances these banks the countries are facing. But altogether, I thought very fascinating comments from both of those bankers. Would like to hear your thoughts. Next up is Seychelles. Now, with Seychelles, when we think about Seychelles, we usually think about tourism, traveling, the lovely, look at that, beautiful area. Most of their income, foreign exchange income, comes from tourism and also exporting seafood. But Seychelles, their central bank made the decision yesterday at their second consecutive meeting to cut their benchmark interest rate. That's their central bank governor there, Caroline Abel. She said, quote, "The economy is fragile right now. There is no tourism activity." The Seychelles economy was initially projected to grow by 3.5% in 2020. And of course, COVID-19 happened. Now, the economy is projected to contract by 10.8%. You have to forgive me, please, if I could gush a little bit about Caroline Abel, because I just read up on her. She's Seychelles' first central bank governor. She got a degree in economics, I believe, from the University of Glasgow. Then she has a master's degree in monetary economics. She started out as a research officer in their Department of Research and Statistics, rose to become the senior research officer, rose to become the director of research, rose to become the deputy governor of the central bank, and then became the central bank governor of Seychelles. She's a big nerd, loves mathematics and statistics. But the key thing here is that they've cut their benchmark interest rates for a second consecutive time, their monetary policy committee meeting. And Seychelles is in trouble right now because nobody is traveling, no one is coming into the economy, and they primarily depend on tourism and seafood exports. So with supply chains being constricted the way supply chains are right now, exports are not really going anywhere for them, and no one is traveling there. So they are facing a lot of challenges. Finally, the presidential task force here in Nigeria they're looking at this week. Boss Mustafa made the announcement yesterday that at the end of this month, well, two things. One, they're going to make a decision next week about the interstate ban, whether, of course, interstate travel ban, whether to relieve it. And then secondly, they're also going to be looking at the wider nation, whether to make a decision on easing the lockdown on the entire country towards the end of this month. A lot of businesses in Nigeria are depending on them making a decision quickly. The aviation industry is tied to this, and I, for one, hope that they do make a decision soon. So Boss Mustafa said in fact, June ends next week. So by the end of next week, we should get a decision also on interstate travel as well. And that's the African update.
Thank you, Rotus. I like the perspective that you just shared at the beginning of this conversation about the two African men and their unique way of looking at debt forgiveness. I didn't see it that way until you pointed the story out. But it's true. The fact does remain that the debt remained unpaid. Even if your creditors are the ones who forgave it, the books will show you did not repay debt,
Definitely.
and it does affect you in the future. But then don't the extenuating circumstances of a pandemic count for anything?
They do, and that's the thing. One has to have an understanding of what's been going on. The IMF has noted this, the World Bank has noted this, the African Development Bank has noted this, everyone has. But I just thought it was pretty interesting. Maybe one can say it's a bit harsh on their part that they're not counting the pandemic as an issue, but you have to take that into cognizance, Tundun, when you're right.
Well, the pandemic is an issue, and it's on the basis of the pandemic that the Bretton Woods institutions have offered debt relief for developing countries. The IMF offering 40 countries in Africa and the Middle East debt relief. And the G7 and the G20 also saying, look, there should be a moratorium on the payment of debts. But the point made by the two persons you refer to is simply that, look, this is a postponement because you will need to pay at the end of the day. Yeah. But in my view, what we need to worry more about is the role of China in the debt trap that many development countries have found themselves. China has offered debt relief on interest-free loans, but China is still very opaque about the amount of the debt and, the approach that China is adopting. And what we may well find is that developing countries, the ones particularly in the Belt Road Initiative, will have to worry about their commitment to China. China accounts for more than 40% of the debt obligations in Africa, and we will need greater clarity in that regard. And I am aligned with the position taken, for example, by the President Macron and others. That's President Macron of France. That what Africa and some developing countries probably need is debt cancellation. Whether that will happen in the context of helping African countries to survive post-COVID is another argument entirely. Okay. Now, to come to the point about, lifting of interstate travel by the Nigerian authorities, the truth of the matter is that there's nothing to lift. Nigerians have not been respecting the ban on interstate travel. So when you talk about, we're going to take a decision by the end of the month, well, that is like playing the ostrich, because really all you need to do to move from one part of Nigeria to the other is to just pay the security persons 500 naira, 1,000 naira, and you are good to go.
You don't even need to pay in some instances.
Correct.
Very short point. Real quickly, I just wanted to make a point on debt, if we have the time. It has to be said very strongly. It has to be said very strongly concerning debt that one area we're not looking at is the fiscal discipline of these countries. They can forgive us debt from today till tomorrow. They can cancel debt. But why are we always falling into that cesspit of debt all over again?
Exactly.
And we're even falling harder and deeper this time. We can shout at the IMF. Former President of Tanzania, Nyerere, can say the IMF is International Ministry of Finance and blame the IMF. But why do we keep falling back, right? That's the point.
Thank you.
For more business updates, we're now joined by Michael Wilson from London. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning. I come from a place in the north of England called Yorkshire, and there's a famous saying there, which is basically, you don't get out for nought. In other words, that's saying you don't get anything for nothing. And that really is what you've been talking about as far as that debt's concerned. And I couldn't agree more. There is a big debt trap, certainly in Africa as far as China's concerned. And there is also a big debate about whether countries who are going through a bad time should just have their debts completely forgiven. It's pointless hanging on. Anyway, enough of that. Let me take you to global markets and a decline in Asian European markets, big jump in infection rates, probably a second spike. We were talking about that yesterday, weren't we? And a jumpy session as well after President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, said that the second phase Chinese talks were actually over. They aren't, and that was corrected by President Trump. And he tweeted straight after that that the deal was still fully intact. On the data front, it all looks pretty mixed as we speak. There's some notable improvements as economies continue to loosen their lockdown restrictions. And we're going to get what we call the flash PMI numbers, the preliminary PI numbers this morning in Europe. I'll come on to that in a second. That's not till 9:30, so that's outside my time, but I'll talk about it with you tomorrow. But we've had some in Australia and Japan, and Australia has rebounded extremely strongly from its prognostications about where the economy is going. That's what a Purchasing Managers Index, a PMI, actually is. Rebounding, listen to this, from 26.9 in May to 53.2 this month, the preceding weeks of this month. And in Japan, the recovery in services was a rebound from 26 to 42.3. Now, the activity in manufacturing sector, we've got to say, is a little subdued. That's pretty obvious because there are a lot of things that haven't been sold which are still waiting to be sold, cars, for example, and so other manufactured goods. And so the inventory effectively around that's got to be worked off. But the sharp rise in cases has actually stymied, I think, a lot of the advances that we were hoping for yesterday. US markets, again, similarly jittery, but there was a rebound in Apple shares yesterday. They unveiled some products which, again, I'm not particularly technical, but this is at the Worldwide Developers Conference, and this is where Apple shows itself off. There's a new operating system called iOS 14, as well as a new chipset which uses Apple technology instead of Intel. So that helped those shares. But there is still this tug of war between the bears on the one hand, who are suspicious of the current background and the current economic backdrop, and the bulls who think to themselves, you know, there's so much government money being pumped into the market that asset prices probably will rise again. But at the moment, it's a bit of a stalemate. An important thing has happened as far as advertising is concerned. Now, this is a massive. Well, it's two things: big revenue for companies, obviously. It's a big spend for companies too, and it's also a very good indicator of what's going on in economies. And ad spending on Google, Facebook, and Alibaba, i.e., the digital platforms, will outpace traditional media for the first time as from today. The total value of the industry is $530 billion. That's quite a sizable chunk that Google, Facebook and Alibaba will be getting. Let me take you to UK and Japan trade. The UK is being pressed to do something within 6 weeks. This is so that the Japanese can take whatever there is decided through these trade talks to their parliament, which meets in the autumn. The problem with all this stuff is that we feel as though we may be being bumped into something we don't actually want. Trade negotiations usually take a long, long time to actually do because they are, by their very nature, extremely complicated. Prime Minister here is moving away from scientific misgivings and opening up more parts of the country, museums, galleries, cinemas, and also cutting the 2-metre rule again, probably by what we're beginning to call here Independence Day, July the 4th. And that adds to a list of pubs, hairdressers and hotels. I spoke to you about those preliminary PMIs coming up at 9:30 this morning. We'll see. It's very difficult to actually tell whether they'll have a proper period to be able to give some proper interpretation to, because we've only just started to go back to various activities in this country, but they're supposed to be quite good. And finally, gold. All right, so it's continuing to rise. I mean, I was talking about 2,000 yesterday. My commodity contact says he thinks that's not going to happen, but the gold is at its highest level since 2011. And as far as oil's concerned, finally, bulls are trying to press the price to $50 a barrel. My contact again says he thinks that's very unlikely. It doesn't matter what the markets do, it doesn't matter what politicians do, it doesn't matter what OPEC does. If the demand isn't there and the overcapacity still is there, which they think still is, then it won't reach that. But it's not doing too badly, given what it was doing only 6 weeks ago. That's the global look. Back to you.
All right, great work, Michael Winston there. I think a point I quickly want to happen is the revolution that is being televised all over the world. I'm talking about the story you broke that for the first time, the revenue of Facebook, Alibaba will be more than traditional media. And for me, it just shows that it takes about 30 years for that disruption to happen. The Internet World Wide Web came about in 1991. Tim Berners-Lee started that movement at CERN. And in less than 20 years, even in less than 30 years, after the dot-com boom and everything, the world has turned on its head, and it's amazing what is happening. Goodness me. Only in this lifetime can we see something like this.
Absolutely, it is. And all you have to do is look around at younger people, if I can put it like that, sitting around in every particular public space that you actually see. When you go back, I'm sure there'll be more of that as well. And what are they doing? They're looking down at their mobile phones. That's where the future is. And the future is all about podcasts. It's all about digital transmissions, and it's good that this program is available on iPhones around the world as well, because that's definitely the way forward. And you're absolutely right. There is a rule, isn't there, about the name escapes me, but you'll know what I'm talking about as far as technology is concerned. It doubles, doesn't it, in years to come? But
Semiconductors double. Moore's Law.
Well, quickly, Michael, if you can, in maybe 30 seconds, give your personal opinion on the plan to reopen museums and restaurants and pubs. Do you think that the Prime Minister is following the science, or this is a case of a political diktat, considering the fact that in other parts of the world, face-to-face contact has resulted in escalation of infections?
It's all about politics. What he's saying is, and there's a certain sense to this I can see, because scientists give different views all the time. It's very, very difficult for laymen, which is what politicians actually are, to sift what the detail of what they're being told. So this is definitely a political move. And I have to say, given the kind of people I talk to every day around and about when we're allowed to do our little bit of shopping and the rest of it, it will come with great approval. People just want to get back to normality as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. What happens next, Aaron?
We have Aaron with our COVID-19 update. Good morning, Aaron.
Yeah, good morning, Tundun.
Good morning,
It's good to see you from this side. And I must say, all right, looking lovely in your monochrome black today. And
Aaron.
Yes, doctor. Good morning to you.
I see Rufai frowning here.
He has the right to, but I pay him no mind at all.
That is not impressed.
Okay, let's get straight into the numbers today and looking at how things are actually playing out in terms of number of infected people with COVID-19 around the world. And right now, we've crossed the 9 million mark for number of people that have COVID-19 around the world. Now, right, if our statistics are actually up, we can actually see that 9,098,855 is the current number, with the US still taking a chunk of it, well over 2 million, and Brazil over 1 million cases. All right, the death toll still stands at 472,172. But now the point is, as we've crossed the 9 million mark, research is actually still coming up, because remember, this is still a novel virus, and a lot of people are still trying to get a handle of this and get a hang of this. And research in China now says that the levels of antibody found in those that have recovered from COVID-19 fell sharply by after 2 or 3 months. Remember, there were a lot of talks and promising signs about the antibodies, the IgG antibodies being found in those that have recovered from COVID-19. But it now says for those, there were 37 symptomatic and 37 asymptomatic patients were tested, and they found out that, as a matter of fact, there is no immunity to this. Just because you have it and you've developed antibodies to this particular virus does not mean you are immune to it. After 2 or 3 months, all right, there's a sharp decline of the antibodies, and you could still contract it. And that maybe answers the question that Rufai posed to me once about Paulo Dybala, the footballer in Juventus in Italy, who had COVID-19 at a certain time and had a relapse and then another relapse again. That just says it there. So if we put that in mind, certainly it's quite worrisome, and we still insist that till this dissipates, we need to take self-responsibility is the way out of this. All right, social distancing, wearing of the face mask, and also the washing of hands or hand sanitizing will still be the way out of this.
Aaron, sorry to cut you in.
Yeah.
But I can't reconcile that. I mean, we had the Commissioner of Health, Lagos State here, that was saying blood plasma treatment was being used some people said it did work for COVID patients. So the blood plasma too is antibodies. So if the blood plasma is working, why can't your body just retain those same antibodies?
At the moment, it's really grime, looking at several of these, or looking at gray areas are still being explored in terms of science and how this actually works. But from those that they've tested, they found out that as much as 90% of those antibodies actually just dies in the course of 2 to 3 months. And at the moment, if you do have it, like those that were celebrating that they do have the antibodies, all right, they are being told at the moment that don't just go around thinking. And they're even proposing that those who have had COVID-19 at a certain period of time in the course of this pandemic should also be very careful, and they should be on a watch list as much as those who carry the virus at present. Active cases. That's how he actually stands right now.
Aaron, the point was made by the Director General of the WHO in the last 24 hours that the virus is going to be with us for a very long time.
Yes, it looks like.
And we should be prepared. And at the same time, the scientists, they are also more or less, in spite of all the efforts being made, still groping in the dark. The report that you have referred to, the researchers, the scientists also said, look, what they've done is limited, because that research was based on the sampling of 37 asymptomatic patients and 37 symptomatic patients. Yes. So if you look at that sample range, it is not representative enough. But on the basis of that, they arrived at the conclusion that we should be careful about immunity passports, which many jurisdictions have been trying to promote as a way of trying to see whether people have, developed antibodies or not. So it's a developing process, and I think that, we should continue to thank the scientists for the devotion that we have seen in terms of trying to find a solution. There will be a lot of revelations as we go on with this capricious virus that is confounding the rest of the world.
All right, here in Lagos, and if we're to actually focus on what is happening in Lagos, because as at the moment we're looking at how things are shaping up in Africa, let's look at the African numbers before we actually chime into Lagos. All right, looking at the African numbers, of course, we said that it had actually crossed the 300,000 mark, now 315,410, with deaths at 8,334. But looking at Lagos as a whole has just about that same number of over 8,000, close to 9,000 cases here. And we are now seeing people, or reports are actually coming in, that a lot of self-medication is actually happening in Lagos. All right, those people who will actually peddle harbor drugs on the local stands, especially researches were done, especially in places like Oshodi. All right, they go about several nomenclatures. They say, some call it agbo, okpenyi, lemongrass, all right, monkey tail, washing and setting, all those names. And they said that people, because they talks about the fact that malaria treatment has worked for COVID-19. So some of these people have decided to take it to the next level, and they're now pushing that if you don't have the monies to probably treat yourself properly, we can actually give you some of these herbs to actually treat you. And that's what we're seeing happen in Lagos, between a bracket or between a demographic of people who are not availed the healthcare that is needed to treat COVID-19. And this is really, really scary.
It is indeed. Where are we on NAFDAC's, that report that NAFDAC is testing herbal remedies?
It's still a long shot. Some of these things clinically cannot be proven to do what they claim to do.
And there's no point taking them then.
But nevertheless, some claim that it does work. And since there are no clinical trials to back some of these claims about the fact that it helps with the libido, it actually helps with back pain, it actually helps with malaria, then...
Aaron, for the record, monkey tail is something entirely different.
No, but it's been taken also.
Well, the truth of the matter is that, the people's obsession with herbal remedies also has a spiritual dimension. It has a cultural dimension. It has a belief system dimension. Because, many Nigerians over the years have been brought up to believe in herbs. And so I don't know whether there is anything that anybody can do about this. Once COVID-19 was announced, a lot of people started taking neem leaves because they've been brought up on neem leaves, or what is known among the Yorubas as dogonyaro.
Okay.
And then you have turmeric, you have lemon, you have lime, and people have been taking this. What is important is for government to continue to enlighten the people.
True.
To say that, look, there's no herbal remedy that has been certified as a solution to COVID-19. And that people should not rely on those herbal remedies. They should take the necessary precautions and observe the guidelines that have been offered by the relevant authorities.
Because usually, remember the Madagascar solution, all right, did this stand clinical trial? All right, that's the road. If these ones were to go to clinical trial, that's the road they would actually just fly.
Anyway, thank you very much, Aaron. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning.